let's dive in.
To him, this is the most important thing of his religion. As Saint Paul, the self-appointed 13th apostle, the self-appointed 13th apostle of Jesus Christ.
Now, obviously, what you need to understand in dealing with Muslims, and I realize that many of you already know this if you've been a long-time listener, but we have new listeners all the time, and so sometimes we go back over basic stuff. But in the modern world, not in the Quran, and not in the early hadith sources of Islam, but in the modern world, Paul is the big bad guy. Big bad guy. He's the one that deceived everybody, and every anti-Pauline book, and there's so much of that out there these days. It doesn't matter who it's written by. It can be as liberal as I don't know what. They will glom onto that. And so notice that Ahmed Deedat, the self-appointed 13th apostle, self-appointed. And I just go, self-appointed, why do you say that? Well, he was self-appointed. Oh, so you don't believe that Jesus appeared to him in a vision? Do you believe that the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad in a vision? How about, do you believe in Muhammad's night flight and all the rest of that kind of stuff? It's just so amazing to me. And you've all heard it before, the inconsistency of the Muslim apologist, who on the one hand will accept the self-appointment of Muhammad as a prophet. Because who else was in the cave to know? Did anyone else see the angel Jibril and every direction he looks, the angels? Did anybody else see that? Did Khadijah see that? Who saw that? Abu Bakr? No. So, on the same ground, wouldn't you have to say that Muhammad was self-appointed if you're going to say it about Paul? Those are questions that I never got to ask Ahmed Deedat, but wish I could have. All right, next clip.
But now, he that had no purse.
Okay, let me give you the background to this. One of the interesting elements of this argument is that Deedat, and remember, his audience, taking the Christians out of the audience, the Muslim audience, there's going to be a 98% chance that the Muslim listening to him has never read the Bible. And so whatever he says must be true. So he gets to create the context. And one of the reasons, and if you're one of my future Muslim opponents or Muslim friends out there, one of the reasons I've said some very strong things about Ahmed Deedat is, if this is the best you've got, and it isn't, but if it is, y'all got some real problems, because anyone who knows the Bible knows that this man is grossly mishandling the text. I mean, you compare, I challenge any one of you, you compare how I handled the text of the Quran in here. You compare how I handled the text of the Quran in this with how Ahmed Deedat handles the text of the Bible. There is no comparison. None. I happen to know that there's something called context. I happen to know what the original language of the Quran was, and I'll take that into consideration as best I can. Deedat tries to create a mythology about the crucifixion, saying, I'm just quoting your Bible. And yet the reality is, every single one of the people that he cites, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, whoever, all said the same thing, that Jesus Christ died on the cross of Calvary. Every one of them says it. So to isolate a phrase here and isolate a verse here, where 2 sentences earlier or 2 sentences later it says Jesus Christ died, ignoring that and then pulling this out and say, see, he didn't die, is the most dishonest, deceptive type of argumentation. And yet it is all Deedat does. It's all he does. It's all he does. So what's he's doing in this clip is and I was going to play a section from one of the debates I was listening to, but I didn't get queued up, so I'll just mention it to you. Basically what he's saying is, he quotes from Luke 22, and he's quoting from the instructions that the Lord gives to the disciples about what they're to do as they're sent out. And he says, if you don't have a sword, buy your cloak and get a sword. He turns this into, oh, you see, Jesus knew he was in trouble. Jesus knew the Jews were coming. And so he gets the disciples, in his words, his very words, armed to the teeth. Now, actually, they had 2 swords amongst 12. Peter had 1 of them. That means that the 8 only had, there may not even been 1 amongst the 8. But here he's setting up the idea that what Jesus does is he sets up an outer line of defense and an inner line of defense. And what he's praying then to the Father about is protection from the Jews. Now, no one, just reading the text for what it says, would ever come to that conclusion. That's not what the authors were communicating. They weren't trying to communicate that. They didn't suggest that. So how does he get away with this? He is banking on the fact that the people in the audience that he wants to reach don't know enough about the New Testament to catch him, and they're not going to care enough to even check him out. So he's banking on. So here's the presentation.
But now, he that hath no purse, let him take it, and likewise his bag. And he that hath no sword, the one to cut people's throats, chop off people's necks. Sword, S-W-O-R-D, sword. Those who have no sword, let him sell his garments and buy one. Luke chapter 22, verses 35 and 36. Preparation. Can you see? Preparation for war, for defense.
War.
That march had failed, and now trouble is brewing. In that upper room, there will be sitting targets for the Jews. So he takes his disciples in the middle of the night, midnight, and he walks them 5 miles out of town to a place called Gethsemane, an olive press, a courtyard, stone walls, and he puts 8 of his devoted disciples. These disciples who were beating their breast in that upper room said, Master, anything happens to you, we are prepared to die for you. Master, we are prepared to go to prison for you. Determined lot. Armed to the capacity what the circumstances would allow. Armed to the teeth.
Armed to the teeth.
And he puts 8 of his devoted disciples at the gate. He says, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. I, alone, I'll go and pray beyond. You sit here at the gate. Watch with me. I said, watch what? What is there to watch in the middle of the night in Gethsemane, olive press? There's nothing there to watch. No, keep guard, because the Jews were after his blood. They'll be coming for him. So you keep guard here. 8 at the gate.
So there you have the setup. And the reality is, 2 swords. They're not set up for battle. These men, there is no conversation about the Jews are coming, look out for the Romans. And in fact, later on, I'm not sure if this next one is the section. Let me see if it is.
James chapter 5 verse 16.
No, it's talking about the prayer. At one point, he will criticize Luke because Luke says that they were sleeping for grief. He says nobody sleeps for grief. But Luke was just wrong about this. Again, Ahmed Deedat had no skills as an exegete. None. I've never seen a situation where Deedat's intention was to actually honestly represent what the Bible was saying. That was irrelevant to him. The Bible was a tool for him to use. That's it. Whether he was accurately representing it, context, language, irrelevant. Irrelevant, as we will see over and over again. So when it talks about he comes to the disciples and he finds them asleep from grief, is what Luke says. He says, no one, because you're grieving, sleeps. So grief takes sleep away from you. Well, yeah, but he's not trying to understand what Luke is actually saying. What has Jesus told the disciples that evening? I'm going away. I'm going away. Where I'm going, you cannot come. That's the exact opposite of the story that he's trying to tell. So when you encounter something where they are exhausted from their sorrow and from their sadness, from the letdown of thinking one thing, and now Jesus is saying, I'm going away. I'm not going to, and where I'm going, you cannot come. You've got John 13, 14, 15. You've got the content of what Jesus shares with them that evening, which Deedat cannot argue against because he uses that very same section to try to find Muhammad in the Bible. We've discussed that one for lengthy periods of time in the past. But anyway, since his story doesn't fit what's there, then he finds things that he can attack and say, well, this was wrong, because it goes against his theme, his story, rather than going, oh, maybe I've misunderstood this. That's just what Deedat is all about in this material.
James chapter 5 verse 16, he says, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. It carries weight. Some cynic remark that if you cry out like that, even the Lord of mercy, the Father in heaven, will come down from his throne to answer your call. You cry like that, bring him down from his throne. He must come to your aid. And God accepted his prayers. He says, who in the days of his flesh, means while he was here with us, he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. He was heard, means God heard his prayers. What does it mean, God heard? Does it mean God is deaf at any time? He's all-hearing God. He hears everything. He hears the whispers. There were secret thoughts he hears. What does it mean, God heard? It means God accepted. Zechariah in his old age, he prayed for a son, and God heard his prayers, and John the Baptist, Yahya alayhi salam, was born. Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam in his old age prayed for a son, and Allah heard his prayers, and Ishmael was born. Ismail. You know what is Ismael? Means God heard. Literally it means in Hebrew, God heard. What? The prayer of Abraham materialized. Ishmael in Hebrew means God heard the prayer of Abraham. So, God Almighty answers his prayer. And there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. Luke chapter 22, verse 43.
So, and again, it just takes forever. Repeat the same thing over and over and over again. That was about the briefest version we could get. But what's the idea? The idea is that Jesus is praying to be saved from death, and since God heard him, then he did not die. And the citation is from Hebrews 5:7. In the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers and supplications with loud crying and tears to the one able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his piety. Now, can anyone read Hebrews 5 and actually think that what the writer to the Hebrews is saying is Jesus didn't die? There's no book in the New Testament that refers more often to the death of Jesus than this book. So you have to just completely disrespect the authorial intent and context of the passage to come up with this reading. But I cannot tell you how many Muslims I've had who said, well, it says in Hebrews 5:7, God saved him from death. Yes, by the resurrection from the dead. It's so obvious. It's so plain. It's right there on the page. And yet, because of the Ahmed Deedat presentations, people go, well, yeah, see, if he cried out with loud crying and tears, the one able to save from death, and he was heard because of his, so he didn't die. No, he was saved from death via the resurrection, whereby he was then seated at the right hand of the Father, intercedes for his people because of his atoning sacrifice. Everything that Deedat in Islam denies is exactly what the writer of the Hebrews was affirming. So when you quote something like that, and you don't know what its context is, or even worse, when you do, it's just dishonest. It's just amazingly dishonest. And yet that's the essence of Deedat's argumentation. We continue forward.
The Son of the living God, and he was the Christ. He was the Messiah. Son of the living God, it was a very innocent Jewish expression. God has got sons by the tons in the Bible. At question time you may ask me and I'll give them to you like that. Sons by the tons, T-O-N-S, tons.
Just thought I'd replay once again the sons by the tons, and you will hear that over and over again. You will hear it over and over again. On the streets of London, everywhere, almost any Muslim you talk to will know Ahmed Deedat's phrase, sons by the tons. Now, of course, again, he has to ignore the very specific utilization of terminology by Jesus. He has to ignore that the Jews accused him of being the Son of God, and therefore he should die, John chapter 19. So obviously the relationship of son that he was referring to was not sons by the tons, sons as in Adam or sons as in David. There was something very specific in John chapter 5 that caused the Jews to seek to kill him because he called God his own father, making himself equal with God, etc., etc., etc. There's just so many holes. But again, that's one of the reasons Deedat rarely put himself in a position of really coming up against someone who could press him on these issues. Because he knew better. He knew that this stuff works a whole lot better in a monologue than it does in a dialogue. And I think we've demonstrated that in a number of the debates we've already done, and we'll demonstrate it again.
The preachers, they tell us that Jesus was led to the slaughter like a lamb, like a sheep before the shearer is dumb. He opened not his mouth. He had say monda ni uop hamak ni. He had say monda ni uop hamak ni. He opened not his mouth. He opened not his mouth. I'm asking, how did he speak? Ask them. When they tell you he didn't open his mouth, he was led like a sheep before his shearer is dumb, like a lamb he's going to a follow, and they slaughtered him and he didn't open his mouth. Ask them, how did he say, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? How did the words come out? From his head? Where did the words come from? He didn't open his mouth. Is the mouth shut? Was he a ventriloquist? You know ventriloquist? Charlie McCarthy and his doll. You know, he makes the doll to say something, but he's uttering voice from his throat, and we think is that doll is talking. Ventriloquism.
Ventriloquism. Ventriloquist. He doesn't put the accent on the right syllable. And it goes on. I mean, I think it goes on for 5 minutes in this mocking, ask these Christians, how could Jesus have been silent as a lamb when he said this and he said that? Was it coming from the top of his head? Was he a ventriloquist? How can these people not see this? And I just go back and go, when it says he did not open his mouth, it obviously means in protest. Hello? He allowed himself. He says again, if you just read the context, he says to his disciples, it is necessary that I go to Jerusalem, and this is what's going to happen, and this is why it must happen. That was in the preceding parts of the book. And so when it says he opens not his mouth, it's not saying he just sat there and going, What it is saying is you don't find Jesus going, help me, someone stop this. Oh, someone do something. Oh, this is a travesty of... You don't see any of that. You don't see any refutation of the lies and inconsistent testimony, because it's inconsistent. It's its own refutation. So this outrageous misuse. Here's a man who will repeatedly say, according to the idiom of the Jews. For example, he will say that when Jesus says, I've not yet ascended to my Father, that according to the idiom of the Jews means I am alive. No, that's absurd, as we will see. But if you really wanted to know something about the idiom of the Jews, this one should have been easy. He opened not his mouth in protest. He opened not his mouth in self-righteous vindication. That is the idiom of the Jews. But he won't use that here. No. Because he wants to make up a reason for accusing the Bible of error or something like that.
And when she goes to the tomb, we are asking, why did she go there?
Now, here, I didn't know if we were going to get to this, but we are. Here is, I don't even know how to describe it, but what you're about to listen to, and to my Muslim friend in South Africa, I fully intend to be fair and seek to honor God and in our encounter. But you try to go here, and I will bury you. Because this argument is utterly bogus. B-O-G-U-S. Bogus. Here, Ahmed Deedat, and he does this in all of his talks, all of his debates. It's in his book. It's in the crucifixion book. It's in the Who Moved the Stone book. I even looked at the crucifixion book, and I wanted to see, does he provide any kind of meaningful documentation for this? And it says at the bottom of the page, here's on the page, it says, this aspect is dealt with in greater detail in a book, Who Moved the Stone? So I went and got Who Moved the Stone, and I looked it up there, and it wasn't dealt with in any more depth. It just reasserted. What's the argument? I'll play it for you, but I'll just go ahead and read it for you here. Sunday morning. It was Sunday morning, the first day of the week, according to Hebrew calculations, was Saturday, the Sabbath is the 7th, when Mary Magdalene alone visited the tomb of Jesus. The question arises, why did she go there? To anoint him, Mark 16:1 tells us. The Hebrew word for anoint is masaha, which means to rub, to massage, to anoint. That's where the footnote is about the more in-depth dealing, which there wasn't. The second question is, do Jews massage dead bodies after 3 days? The answer is no. Do the Christians massage dead bodies after 3 days? The answer is again no. Do the Muslims, who are the nearest to the Jews in their ceremonial laws, massage dead bodies after 3 days? The answer again is no. Then why should a Jewess want to massage a dead, decaying body after 3 days? We know that within 3 hours, rigor mortis sets in, the stiffening the body after death. In 3 days' time, the body will be fermenting from within. The body cells will be breaking up and decomposing. If anyone rubs such a decaying body, it will fall to pieces. Does the rubbing make sense? No. It would, however, make sense if she was looking for a live person. You see, she was about the only person besides Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus who had given the final rites to the body of Jesus. If she had seen any sign of life in the limp body of Jesus when he was taken down from the cross, she was not going to shout, "He is alive." She returns after 2 nights and a day, when the Jewish Sabbath had passed, to take care of Jesus. Now, did any of the gospel writers have anything like this in mind at all? Of course not. What's your evidence? Matthew, Mark, Luke, John all say the same thing. Jesus was dead. He died. Paul? No. Peter? No. Anybody? No. Well, what about, I'm sorry. I jumped the gun. Let's listen to it in his own sonorous tones.
And when she goes to the tomb, we are asking, why did she go there? So the gospel says she went to anoint him. So we are asking, you see this Hebrew word, anoint is masah. Masah means to rub, to massage, to anoint. So we are asking the Christian, he says, do Jews massage dead bodies after 3 days? Do they? Because within 3 hours rigor mortis sets in. You know, the hardening of the cells. The body starts fermenting from inside. Such a rotting body, when you massage it, falls to pieces. Does it make sense? After 3 days, she wants to go and massage a dead rotting body. Do Jews do that? Ask the Jews. They say no. I say, you Christians, do you massage dead bodies after 3 days? The answer is no.
All right, so here's the argument. That the Hebrew term is masaha, and this means to massage. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians, as soon as somebody throws out an original language issue, they go, but something immediately should have struck you. This is quoting from Mark chapter 16, verse 1. What was Mark written in? It wasn't written in Hebrew. It was written in Greek. And the Greek, well, Mark 16:1 says, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome, so it's not alone, bought spices. Not massaging material, but spices. Here, let me blow this up a little bit here. I'm even going to blow this up over here because we're going to have to look at it, okay? Bought spices so they might come and anoint him. Well, here's the term anoint. And over on the right-hand side, alipso, you will see, literally, to anoint by applying a liquid such as oil or perfume. Anoint. So you can have the anointing of the ill. The woman anoints Jesus's feet. Of the dead with spices. Mark 16:1. So here's BDAG. Those of you who are familiar with Christian scholarship know that BDAG is the Bauer, Donker, Arndt, and Gingrich 3rd edition current standard Greek lexicon of Greek in the biblical New Testament period. The only other meaning given is to besmear with something figuratively, and that's not found in the New Testament. You might see EPH. That's Ignatius's letter to the Ephesians. That's not the New Testament. So the only New Testament usage is to anoint by applying a liquid such as oil or perfume to anoint, not massage. And if you look at spices, aromata, you can find all sorts of evidence that that term refers to materials used in Jewish burial practice. There is no word masaha. Oh, but certainly, you see, what we have to do is, this may have been written in Greek, but they spoke Aramaic. And so we have to look at that. Well, that's conjecture. Anytime, there's no Aramaic original of Mark. In fact, it's obvious that Mark was not written in Aramaic first, because it has all these places where which translated means this. Mark is plainly written for a Greek-speaking audience. So any speculation as to what an original term would have been is just that, speculation. We don't know and could not possibly know what terminology would have been used, but let's run with it. Let's run with it for a moment. Let's look at the Hebrew for masaha. It certainly can mean to touch, to rub, things like that, depending on what form it's used in. But its primary meaning is to smear with liquid, such as oil or dye, to anoint cultic objects, to anoint humans, to anoint kings, which just went by there, the priest, the anointed one, the Mashiach. A prophet could be anointed or ordained to certain functions, to be anointed as a king, etc., etc., in the Nifal form. So the idea of massaging, as in trying to get someone better, where was that in all that? So even if it was masaha, any serious individual would go, well, we need to look at the context. And in the context, they bought these spices not to come give him a massage after having left him without food and water in a hole for 2 days. This, to any rational person, to any person who is being at all fair, this is the action of women who are caring in the standard Jewish tradition for a body that had to be rushed into the tomb prior to the Sabbath day. Now, I'm not sure if I get into this one. I might. If I haven't marked it, I'll try to mark it. But at one point, we will have to deal with the way that Jews kept time. Because Deedat, and really, he should completely understand this, because there would be plenty of examples of it in Islamic history. But he does the 3 days, 3 nights, Jonah has to have been Wednesday, couldn't have been Friday thing. Shows complete ignorance of what the word for Friday is in Greek. Preparation day, in case you're wondering. Paraskue. And doesn't understand that any portion of a day is counted as a full day. He probably does understand that, but just didn't bother to tell people because it doesn't fit his paradigm. But we will have to get into that as we work through this. But this whole argument utterly fails. Contextually, linguistically. Deedat defenders, you show me a single place in this book where I even got close to doing what Deedat did with regularity to the text of the New Testament. Just one place. Just one place. You know it's not there. Because we show you far more respect when we deal with your text than Deedat showed for us. I realize there are some of you, I've had Muslims say, yeah, I recognize Deedat wasn't the best we have to offer. But the reality is, even if you say that to me privately, you know that you'd have a hard time saying that in a lot of places in the world. Why has this man had such an impact? That is a question that I would have to ask you. Now, some of you who saw a debate that I did in South Africa remember that the gentleman I debated used this very argument from Ahmed Deedat. Maybe the last one we get to today. And we're not. Yeah. After this is the 30 points. Here. There are the 30 points if you want to show that. Yeah. That's what it looks like. Each of the colors is the point. So the first red blocks, point number 1, blue is point number 2, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the 30 points. But here is where we are. Here is Ahmed Deedat's explanation of John 20:28. Let's listen to it.
8 days later, Jesus comes again. Now he sees this guy. Thomas says, "Hey, Thomas, come. Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hands, and put your hand into my side, and don't be faithless." Now he realizes what a fool he was. So he says, "My God, my Lord." So now the Christians say he recognized that Jesus is his God and his Lord. Imagine. You exclaim, you go and report me to the special branch that Deedat was preaching communism here. To you all, communism. So they come along, harass me, they give me trouble, and they tell me eventually, he says, look, it's your friend, man. Who? Mr. Muhammad. He said, he is the guy who was, prodding us. So when I meet him, his broad smiling face, my benefactor, my friend, I say, "Sali, my God, what a thing to do. Sali, my God. He's my God." I say, "Sali, Allah, what a thing you have done. Sali, Allah, you Allah. What's wrong with you people?" This is an exclamation. What a fool that I was, man. The 10 disciples telling that he's alive, and I said, "I will not believe."
Now, if you didn't follow that, I guess I can understand why that would be, but it's not that difficult to get. The argument, which is what so many Jehovah's Witnesses use as well, is that Jesus, when Thomas sees Jesus, he's saying, "My Lord, my God," as if Jesus is Lord, God is somebody else. Let me explain one more time for those who'd like to know, and I'll switch back over to accordance here. That is impossible given the grammar of the New Testament. It's impossible. And here's why. Over here, apokrythe Thomas kai aipen auto hakuriasmu kai hatheasmu. Thomas answered and said to him, singular. The next break in the language is legai auto, verse 29. So what we have between ha and mu is one quotation. If there were quotation marks in the Greek language, you'd put the quotation marks right before ha and right after mu. This is one quotation, and according to the grammar of the text, it's all said to one person, Jesus. Aipen auto. Thomas answered and said to him, hakuriasmu kai hatheasmu. Kai is not disjunctive. It's not breaking it up. He says, my Lord and my God. That is not an interjection. He's not swearing. He's not going, my Lord, my God. The grammar will not allow it. And in fact, there are Old Testament parallels to that phraseology that we've looked at times in the past. The point is, Deedat tells a little funny story. Does he care what the Greek says? Could he even read the Greek? No, he could not. We've demonstrated before that his comments, for example, on John 1:1, demonstrate that on the most basic level of grammar, he could not follow the grammatical forms. He couldn't tell the difference between an accusative and a nominative. Didn't even know what the difference was. That's not first year Greek, that's first week Greek. So he couldn't do that. But that explanation, impossible from the grammatical perspective of the Greek New Testament itself. Thomas answered and said, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus' response was to identify what Thomas did as an act of faith. Because you've seen me, have you believed? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. That's what the text is saying. Reject it if you will. I doubt the author of the Quran ever heard it. But that's what it says. That's what it says. So, next time we get back to Ahmed Deedat, I'm not going to give you a specific time so people can't go, well, you've got to do this very next time. But probably next time, maybe next time, we will have the 25 points. 30 points. 30 points. Why Jesus did not die. The 30 arguments. Crucifixion or crucifixion. What?